Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Story is important because it's how we make sense of the world around us. Storytelling is essential. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Every single human being constructs their entire world with story. Stories resonate with us. Without story, we can't communicate and we can't understand. Even a loving embrace and a hug that gives you a deep, warm feeling is giving you a deep, warm feeling because you're putting that into a story in your mind about what that means to you. Stories connect in a way unlike any other information. You will communicate in a way that people not only understand, but care about. A data sheet or a PowerPoint presentation that isn't fueled by story is nothing to care about. A great story affects you. A great story affects you. A storyteller will know that their message is connecting with an audience because that audience will lean in. And when people lean in, they want to know more, they want to engage, and they want to act. Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Stories are literally the bridge between people. The bridge between people. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are literally the bridge. Stories are how we make sense of the world.
Hello and welcome. It is Friday, the 22nd of September, and it's time for your weekly story clinic, shall we say, where we're talking through things like conveying your brand's unique story, your brand's values, doing all that in a way that's going to engage people, right? So I'm Matthew Woodgett, CEO, founder, principal consultant here at Go Narrative, and that's what we spend all day, every day doing. We specialize in the tech sector, and companies with sort of 50 to 200 employees are kind of, small to mid-size enterprise, absolute fantastic partners in what we do. We find that we can really, really help in that space, and entrepreneurial organizations as well. A huge fan of those, and we also do some work with enterprises. But if you're in that sort of 50 to 200 space and your revenue is $2 to $10 million, even a bit higher, but you're basically bumping into where you want to get to that next level, and you've taken a pause and you've thought, what can we do to make it to that next level? And you've thought to yourself, you know what? I think we need to rethink our story, right? We've got this great offering. It's evolved, it's changed. We've really, really nailed our relationships in the practitioner space. And now we want to go a bit further out. We want to get people who maybe don't live and breathe what we do every day to be interested. Why? Why is that important? Well, it's because of the business decision makers who are involved in the processes of buying your stuff, your offerings, or software, your services, whatever it happens to be. And that's what we at Go Narrative specialize in helping with. And this all started for me way back, well, a long time ago in terms of storytelling and my passion there. But in 2012, when I was just about to walk out the door at Microsoft, not a lot of people know that. Obviously, it's public knowledge now. But I got pulled back in because I had this wonderful job offer internally from somebody who I loved working with, Fred Studer, and still do. And he said, you know what, we need this chief storyteller for Microsoft Dynamics. We also need somebody to help us manage the sponsorship we've just established with the Lotus F1 team, now known as Alpine. And anybody who knows me and knows my love of cars knows that was a pretty compelling offer. So first time I was actually getting paid officially to do storytelling, and found myself in a similar situation to a lot of you when you have that thought. I know we can come up with a better story about what we're doing. And so I was in that same boat trying to do that for our organization. And the first thing I did was look to avoid reinventing the wheel, right? In fact, I think back to where I first heard that, not the reinventing the wheel, but specifically in a mentorship conversation regarding my career. Nick Drew, the sales guy that I worked with when I worked in sales at Intel. And he said, if you can find somebody that's already done it and has already got a process, a framework, an approach, whatever that happens to be, use it, right? Don't try and reinvent it. Waste of energy, waste of time. And as we all know, salespeople are great at optimizing their energy, a kind of hunter mentality, right? Which is really important, by the way, if you work with salespeople. Don't think that they're lazy because they're quiet when it's a little bit of a quiet spell, because they are waiting, sharpening their tools and their implements. I don't want to say weapons, right? That kind of sounds a little bit too, taking that metaphor a little bit too far, but they're ready to pounce. And so Nick had this great insight, and it made me think about, salespeople and hunters, and finding a good design for that spear or for that arrowhead, right? And copying it. In fact, living here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of history around the arrowheads, and in fact, even where I grew up in the UK, the flint arrowheads as well, going even further back. And it's actually really hard to make an arrowhead out of flint. I've tried, and just smashing the flint and breaking it in all these random directions. So even though that design was consistent from hunter to hunter, from generation to generation, even though that design was consistent, making it required some skill, required a certain approach, right? And I think that's a part of what Nick was saying, is within the bounds of a known approach, you still have to make it your own. And storytelling, very similar, right? So as I sat down to start getting stuck in for this, this chief storyteller role, I went and I had a look at the existing frameworks. I found some great content out there from folks like Bo Eason, Michael Margolis. A lot of it really, though, leaned into either one of two things. Either was personal branding, like your own, the authentic story, which is, don't get me wrong, this is important stuff. And then Hollywood and the hero's journey. And that was where the bulk of the material existed. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that it was its own area of expertise, that just like a business and the products you have in a business, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at literature, look at creating a book, creating a movie, these are all things that have their own product, the book, the movie, right? And it's this whole area of expertise. And what dawned on me is that it was the wrong tool for the job. It was the spear when we needed an arrow, or vice versa. And that got me thinking about business storytelling even more so, because I was already thinking about business storytelling. And I'd say it was about that point, whilst I was also getting invited to other departments to help with adopting storytelling, is about that point that I had this fantasy at the time to start a firm that would help more than just Microsoft, where I was at the time. Being a huge fan of technology, I couldn't help but think about all the other companies that I could help. And that remained a dream for a while, until family tragedy in 2015 lit a fire under me to go and do something different with my life. And it was shortly thereafter, about 6 months after the death of my parents, that I decided I was going to resign from Microsoft and left the company. Spent a bit of time at a small marketing firm. I'd spent so much time at big firms, Intel and Microsoft, that I wanted to get some experience in a smaller firm. And after a year there, I was ready. and I founded Go Narrative in 2017. And so at that point, it was really about figuring out how should we carve these arrowheads? What's the right approach to carving the arrowhead for storytelling in business? And that's what we help with, right? Whether it is developing a strategic narrative, whether it's developing a video for an ad buy, whether it's a keynote, any of these places where storytelling shines within your business. Those are the obvious ones though. And the next click down under that, all of the other types of influence that we have to make in business, right? Whether that's motivating our employees, the partner relationships we have with our partner channel. A lot of software firms have that experience. Partnerships in general, right? No business is an island. We work, we have suppliers, we have partners, and we often have an agenda. We always have an agenda, and whether it's we want people to buy our product rather than our competition, or it's to get a new distributor, or whether it is to have an organizational change that we want to get everybody on the same page and committed to, right? These are all things where we're looking to influence, and storytelling is a massive part of that, right? And so this is a space each week where you can come and you can ask questions about how to approach storytelling, and we'll keep it as simple as possible, as accessible as possible, so that it can be a really useful tool for you. And we also have a bunch of great resources up on gonarrative.com, our blogs. We've got the ebook. It's really the first chapter of the Storytelling for Action playbook, and a whole bunch of resources you can use when it comes to applying this stuff. And we recently launched the ability to discover your business story type, which is kind of taking this idea of helping business people do storytelling without learning storytelling to a whole new level. It's almost like helping business people do storytelling without even thinking about the idea of story, right? Now, it's the business story type assessment, so the word story's in there, so you're already thinking about it. But effectively what it's all about is understanding where your business is now, what you've been dealing with, and what the right story to be telling right now is. And we actually use it as the beginning of our tactical narrative process, where it's a 6-week story accelerator, a 6-week sprint, where we help you build out that story, that tactical narrative. And so it all starts with discovering your business story types. You can see that if you go to gonarrative.com, the very first thing there that you can click on is discover your business story types. So go ahead and do that. It takes 5 to 10 minutes. I think if you're thoughtful about it and you really think about answering the questions thoughtfully. How many more times can I say the word thoughtfully? Thinking about it, thought about it, thoughtfully about it. It take about 10 minutes. It's 14 questions, and don't worry, nothing to do with storytelling. It's all about your business, right? What are you dealing with? What are the challenges? What are the frictions, the whether it's competition or the product or your customers, all these things that you're navigating and dealing with. Is questions about that. And from that, you will get a story type. And in fact, why don't I just share this image here so you can have a nice little visual as well. So this is not moving. There we go. Oh, okay. Moving that out the way so you can see this. And we'll go ahead and flick this on. So these are the 7 story types, loosely maps to change management. See, what I've discovered over the past 7 years almost of running Go Narrative, and before that, even just the storytelling in general, is there's one thing that is always there when it comes to storytelling. Can you think about what that is? What's the one thing in every story? You can say focus on business stories. What's the one thing in every business story? You're thinking about it. You're thinking, okay. Some of you might be thinking it's having a journey. Some of you might be thinking it has to be a hero, or we could say a central character for the story. And some of you might be thinking this there's this character that wants something. These are all in the right space, but there's one way of characterizing all of that, and that is change. So the thing that's central to every story is change. If you imagine you're driving down the road and you suddenly, out of nowhere, there's this car appears, right? And it shocks you, surprises you. They were going fast. Maybe you weren't paying attention. Maybe you feel like they were going too fast. Maybe it's a bit different. Maybe you're driving down the road, you're in the middle lane on a motorway or a freeway, and there's a person in front of you suddenly cuts into you because they want to get around the cars in front. And I like this example because you're paying attention. You're fully engaged. You've already seen the car. It's right there in front of you, and it suddenly cuts in front of you, and you have to react. So you've been checking your mirrors. You know your environment, and you double check your mirrors, and you slow down. Maybe you can slam on your brakes if there's nobody behind you. Maybe you have to kind of flash your brakes a bit and slow down to give yourself that space with that car in front. They just ate up your space because you were traveling safely behind the car they're now behind, right? And you're shocked. Oh my goodness, you come up with all sorts of expletives and descriptions of this driver. I like to say, as a side note, there's some horrible statistic that talks about the average intelligence of, I think the stat I saw was in the US, but I think this applies to the developed world. And that is the average intelligence education maybe is like 10 years old. So I might be butchering that statistic a little bit, but whether I am or I'm not, I think to myself, and I say to my wife if we're driving together, remember, it's a 10-year-old driving that car. So these things happen to you, right? This person's cut you off, and then maybe you're driving to meet a friend for dinner, and you sit down, you're having dinner, and you tell that story, what I just told, right? And the change element of that story is you were driving along on your way to meet your friend for dinner, and suddenly this crazy person just cut you off, right? That's the change, right? That moment is the change. And so what I found in all the stories I've read and watched and all the structures I've analyzed and all the stuff about brain science and emotions and hormones that I've read. We should talk about hormones one week, by the way, and how to trigger the right hormones and not. I got onto that whole thing from David J.P. Phillips. Absolutely fantastic stuff and super powerful. We'll have to talk about that sometime. But this idea that at the heart of all these things is change, right? And then I was thinking about like how could we potentially carve up these experiences in a way that makes sense, being obsessed with frameworks and distilling things down to make them super easy for you. And so I wondered, like, what does the bigger picture look like? And business is also all about change, right? We've got an idea for a product because we know it can change the world, the better. So heart of business, heart of stories, change. What a wonderful connection, right? So this story type maps loosely to change management, right? So change imposes challenges on us, right? When there is a change, we have to deal with it. We have to slow the car down. We have to make sure that it's safe behind us. All these things we have to do in the moment. Bit of water there. I love my Yeti being here we go. It's a promotional super fan influencing promotion there. Love the Yeti cuts. So change imposes a challenge, right? And so this might be what's happening with your business right now. You're dealing with a change, dealing with a perception change. A client that we recently worked with had this exact issue. It was an external force. It was competition related, and it was all about the change that imposed. So and the challenge, that resulted in. So when we've got this challenge, we've got to figure out, is there a car behind us or not? How hard can we hit the brakes on? we need to change lanes, right? That's changing direction. So it kind of forces us to look at where we're going and to change direction. And once we get deep into that, we start thinking about things like pivoting, right? And that's the pivot story type is about this moment where you're looking at these new ways to go. And there's also often a lot of excitement and interest there and fear as well, right? Is this going to pan out? Is this not going to pan out? And as you go through these experiences, you learn, right? And we all do. We can't help but learn, right? For example, if you are not particularly good at leaving space in front of you, which driving in the US, I've noticed more times than not, you might make a decision to hold back, give a bit more space between you and the car in front, just in case it happens again, right? And so you learn these things, right? And the ability to help others then becomes a thing because you've got this knowledge, and you can even package that knowledge up, right? So and when you do that, you can help somebody go faster than they would otherwise. There's a quote, and it's basically something along the lines of, actually, you know what, the real quote is not really, not quite for our times. Let's just put it that way. But also, it's a little bit on the negative side. So this is the way I like to think about it, though, is that smart people learn from their own mistakes, and super smart people learn from other people's mistakes, right? So if you can learn in a book or through a story or some other knowledge transfer about how to navigate a challenge, then you can help somebody speed up. You can help them short circuit the problems they may have, right? So you might come away from watching this today and be that little bit better at leaving space between you and the car in front. Fantastic, right? So sped it's a catalyst for change. It's a catalyst for your change. And we find a lot of consulting firms, by the way, they've spend their time here because they've gone through the experiences, they understand, and then they've experienced it with their own clients, their own customers, and taken it to a place where they can package it up and sell it, right? And so that's the catalyst story type. Now, as we approach things in that new way, it also gives us the ability to innovate, right? To create new things, to create new services, to create new products, right? So maybe this is where you are. Maybe you're an entrepreneurial firm, a startup that's got a new product, or maybe you're an established firm and you're 100 people. You're looking at moving to from sort of the next revenue goal, pushing it to 50 million in revenue, and you've launched this new offering, and there's a whole story behind that, right? So that's where the innovation comes. It's applying these in a sort of productized fashion. And once you've done that, why do you do that? Why do you have the idea for a product or an offering in the first place? It's to bring positive change into the world. I think this thing can help, right? It can help people's lives, and ultimately improve those experiences, right? And so here, from a flow perspective, as we've taken each of these steps, makes a lot of sense. The other thing, however, in this space is sometimes we know, right, that we need to make things better for our customers, and that could be satisfaction surveys, it could be PR coverage, it could be any number of things that make us realize we need to improve these experiences. So there are different routes to each one of these story types, and that's why when you take the story assessment, you'll see that those questions are all about the types of things that you're dealing in business, to try and weed out what it is that makes the most sense for you and where you are within this experience. So once we've improved the experiences and things are better, whether it's a new product or we've fixed some satisfaction issue, we need to then be able to go and communicate that and get people from thinking this one thing to thinking this thing, right? Getting them to view us in a more positive light, right? So, and that's about changing the perception from this one thing to this other thing. And you might, this might be something that you're experiencing in if you had a PR issue, or if an executive did something bad. News yesterday, I saw that there was yesterday, the day before, there was a leak, an Xbox leak from Microsoft, and I think it was to do with the discovery process for the antitrust trial that they're involved with. But but there was this leak, right? And it communicated what these plans were, and that may or may not have changed, and inadvertently changed the perceptions of people. Oh, right. So there was something in there about acquiring Nintendo. Oh, well, what does that mean? I love the Switch. Does that mean that will become a Microsoft product? Like, what about like the back catalog of Mario? Does that mean it's all going to be available for free on the Xbox? Right. So your perception's already changing, and that's a really, really good point, right? If you don't get into that conversation intentionally and think about how you can help steer the perception change, you're leaving it up to the powers that be out there in the world, right? And that's not necessarily going to pay off for you in the long run. If you're good at dealing with change, if you're adept at navigating this, you're probably the sort of person or organization that's got an open mind, that is able to consider and think about different things and ask the tough questions, to do things like innovate, right? And maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe we should add this to the product, or have we thought about doing this from a customer satisfaction perspective? So this idea of a growth mindset, which incidentally, I think is more than just you can do anything. I think it's that the way I view it is this harnessing of both the ability to ask tough questions, to have an open mind, to challenge yourself, to challenge the organization, to create an environment for that. Then that's gonna play a role in many of these types of these situations. But some companies are just so good at it. Some people are just so good at it that it's really a part of who they are and a part of their story. By the way, if you're really good at a growth mindset, you find yourself, and this is why it's a cycle, find yourself asking the tough questions that get you back into another situation where there's a challenge that you have to deal with. But as you look at these story types, you probably find yourself gravitating to a couple of them. And what I found with our clients and folks who've done the assessment is that the growth mindset and the innovation story types are two that people really want to embrace. They want their story to be about these things. And the truth is, even if that's the case, I want you to look at what the challenges, the change in your business and the problems that that's causing, and where you are in your journey. And it might be that you're an organization that absolutely prioritizes a growth mindset. And because of that, you provide an amazing service to your clients. A client that we've been working recently with in the startup space, who does a combination of accelerators and also works with governments and corporations to help them tap into innovation in the startup culture and mindset. And their primary story type is growth mindset. And there's so many reasons for it. They've all spent time in the startup world. So they've all been through and in environments where asking questions and challenging the status quo is a big part of the daily grind. It sounds so negative. I was thinking maybe it's something more positive. Part of your day. How about that? But it also is, they've done so much experimentation. They've worked with so many companies who've done so much experimentation in accelerators and so on, that they are able to understand and embrace a growth mindset in a way that they're always doing, that always gives them insights that they can then deliver to their clients. So this is not just that there's a great culture. This is a great culture that directly relates to their ability to provide that service. And it's different to the catalysts, right? So yes, they are speeding things up a little bit. And so there is a little bit of that genetic material, if you will, of the catalyst in here. And by the way, if you take the story type and you book some time to chat about it, I will put together a unique story fingerprint for you. And so you'll actually see the balance of all your story types, because we do have a toe or a finger in most of these in some way. But which one is bubbling to the top, which one can you hang your hat on. And so with the catalyst, that's more about speeding things up, accelerating things, and having that be the top, even though it may have been fueled by a growth mindset. Having the growth mindset at the top means that this is a crown jewel of what you're ultimately delivering. So go ahead, go to gonarrative.com/story-assessment, or just go to gonarrative.com and click on this button, discover your business story type, and you will get, within about 10 minutes, your business story type. And it doesn't require learning anything about storytelling. So when you get your story type, I would then encourage you to use that to pick the stories that you tell. That's the first step. Very simple action for you to take. So let's pick one that we've not talked about as much. The pivot. So let's say your story type is a pivot. Over the next 3 days, I want you to keep your radar on and tuned in to information about pivots, changes of direction. Stories, right? Are you hearing stories from people in your network? Maybe you're seeing them on LinkedIn. Maybe you watch a movie and it's about a big change in direction, and that's a big part of the journey of the main characters. Maybe you're at a social event and you're listening to folks over a cocktail or a coffee or a cup of tea, and they share a time when they had to make this big change of direction in their life. You can go in the next step further and is ask the question, right? So we've been chatting for a few minutes. Okay, yeah. No, that's really cool. That makes me think of, so was there a point within that where you had to change direction completely and listen to what they have to say, and you'll come up with the right way of you asking this in your own voice. Another couple of ways we could say it would be, oh, okay, so yeah, that's really fascinating. Did that cause any need to change the direction that you were heading in? And so what you'll get from this is you'll get the stories like I was able to share about our client in the accelerator space and the startup space. And you can use those as a part of your daily work, right? So you can use them with your team as you're working to lead them in whatever it is that you're seeking to do. Remember, your story type's the pivot in this case. And so you've built up this little collection of half a dozen or so little stories in your story bank. If you want a format for a story bank, shoot me an email, matthew@gonarrative.com, and I'll send you a little framework. Another framework, but you can use to put your stories in for a story bank. You'll have this little story bank, these half dozen or so stories, and you can use them with your team as you're kicking off an all hands or kicking off your weekly meeting. You could use it if you're out in the field meeting up with some customers and you want to understand the pivots that they're going through. Use one of those stories as an anecdote as you start to have the conversation. If you do that, just that one thing with your story type, consistency will exist in everything you say. When there's consistency, it makes it easier for people to jump on board, right? It's like if there's a train, right? And if it's, in the movies, are the people like running to get on the train and the train's gradually speeding up. Imagine that train's like suddenly slamming its brakes on and then going much faster, right? All this kind of back and forth. How am I going to get into this car? And then maybe the door is kind of sliding and closing because of these changes. It makes it really hard to do things when there's inconsistency because we're having to process all this information. When we simplify and bring consistency in, it becomes a vehicle for understanding because you've created this kind of level playing field, if you will, for the information. and people will start to get what it is that you're about. And if you then tell your own pivot story, that benefits from all of that consistency. In this example, it could well be that the perception that ends up existing is this is a company or a person or maybe a support agent or a salesperson or a leader that really understands this idea of changing direction and is able to help me with my changes of direction. And so you then start to build that connection. Now, notice I mentioned changing perception in there, right? So changing perception as a component. Maybe your secondary, your supporting story type is changing perceptions, right? And maybe that's something you'll then bring into those stories in a more meaty way. But at the end of the day, I just want you to be able to benefit from the power of storytelling without really having to think about it. And all of this stuff, these 7 story types, the assessment, all of it comes from this place of understanding how stories work in business and then coming up with a way to help you leverage that without having to really think about it because you've got so much on your plate. So we've talked about storytelling without storytelling. We've talked about this idea of the story types. I'm so excited to hear what story type you have and what it means to you, right? Shoot me an email. Let me know when you get your story type. Book some time, right? We do these 20-minute story assessment calls, right? Like I said, you book one of those, we'll get your fingerprint put together. We'll have a chat about it. Does this resonate? Like, what questions do you have? By the way, that client that I mentioned with the growth mindset, their initial reaction was, we wouldn't want to talk about mistakes we've made and things we've learned because it would potentially undermine confidence in us. And it makes a lot of sense. I completely agree, right? The way of talking about that is about what we mentioned earlier, and that is how, because of our ability to constantly be learning, constantly be asking the tough questions, we gather so much that we can then give to you that you don't have to go through all of that. And that is very powerful, right? So we can have a conversation about, like, look, it says innovation, but we don't have any new products. Maybe it's different to that. Maybe your innovation is really being able to find new ways of doing things. So with that being said, one of the questions that we kind of touched on this a bit last week, but one of the things that I've been asked this week, and I get asked quite frequently, in fact, is, okay, now I want to tell a story. How do I do that? And in fact, as Annette Simmons, in the Story Factor book, she has this example of somebody on a team who's sending emails that are not very thoughtful and is causing problems within the team. And she says, instead of confronting them, maybe you're their manager, instead of confronting them and saying, you're sending these shitty emails and it's pissing everybody off, use a story. Tell a story about a person that was sending emails and not thinking about it, and then they lost their job. And I'm like, okay, so how does that help me with when I'm looking at challenging situations I've got and figuring out what story to tell? So I've been thinking about this, and it can be really helpful to kind of go through. We've got something here for you. I will share it on the screen here for you. And let's do this. Okay. Okay. See this? Okay, so you've got this challenging situation. We've got this idea of somebody who's sending these kind of difficult emails. So how do you construct a story that's gonna work? Well, let's do it like this. So how to build and tell a story. I'm going to do a little mind map here. So there's a couple of different steps that I want you to go through. First of all is look at the situation. Like in this case, it's the emails are causing some problems. And I want you to identify emotions. This goes to what I mentioned earlier about the hormones and what happens here. There's what happens when cortisol is triggered, for example, or what happens when dopamine is triggered, right? And what types of language does that? But first of all, you need to understand what emotions are going on here. So in this case, we want to look at the emotions of the audience, right? So we know that, and I'll keep it this simple. It's causing upset, and maybe that's because of misunderstandings. Sure, Mark's not doing this intentionally. That's the name of the person I've got in the story. Okay, so that's the first step. You've got this challenging situation that's going on, and you want to come up with a story for it. This is an internal example, but this could easily be coming up with a story for an event that you're going to. Maybe you're coming up with stories for your keynote, for example. So the next thing that we want to do is you want to say, okay, so that's all very well and good, but what are the similarities, right? What are the things that we can zero in on that will resonate? So in this case, we want to look for what effectively is this connection to the misunderstanding is not realizing, and Mark's not realizing what's going on here, right? So similarities, seek similarities. So if so looking at the first, I'll go through the steps here, and then we'll do a story that fits. So then we're going to say, okay, so similarities, not realizing the impact. It's kind of a bit of a cluelessness here. We're looking for coming up with the basics, right? So then we can figure out a story that we've got that can map to that when we look at our little story bank, right? So we're seeking those similarities. Then what we want to do is we're going to say, okay, let's focus on outcomes. Oops. What happened, right? I'm going to put the word focus in here. I think it's important. So what happened with the Mark situation is ticked off some people. He's not going to do particularly well long term, right? So we call it political damage. So these are the outcomes that we know are happening and that we want to address, right? This is why we even come up with the story in the first place. If this was a customer story, it might be something along the lines of, and they kept losing customers to the competition, right? So that's like the outcome that is being forced through all of this, and then embrace the differences. So this is me saying to you, be kind to yourself. Your story doesn't have to be exactly the same. So embrace the difference. And I'm going to call this permission. or difference. Okay, so your story doesn't have to be an exact map. And this is one of the things with that Annette Simmons example where I'd say, let's look at it a bit differently. And that is, you might not have a story that's an exact match. So what do? Another issue, you might have a story that's an exact match, but it's kind of obvious when you tell it. And it comes across as cat-handed, it comes across as aggressive, it gets Mark's defenses up, all these potential different outcomes, right? Negative outcomes. So just give yourself some permission to look in your story bank and focus on the outcomes, the similarities, and the emotions. These are your common threads, right, for this story. And then I want to give you a few little simple steps that you'll go through as you tell the story. Just make it super, super easy. You've probably heard me talk about our 3D framework, which I came up with just after founding Go Narrative. It was my first line in the sand to come up with a way of telling stories super easily. And it's desire, difficulty, denouement. This fancy French word here, by the way, means the untangling of the knot. French, and it's going to direct literal English meaning is, oops, my dyslexia showing. So this is the 3D framework, and I still remember I was going down to one of our first clients, Cooper Compliance. We did their whole marketing presence, small business, and their team really needed something to help remember. So this was, it kind of came out, birthed through that process, if you will. And we do have the Putting the Story to Work framework, which is a mashup of 3D, some Aristotle, and also South Park. Trey and Matt, Trey Stone and Matt Parker from South Park and their and, but, therefore framework, which are all great, but I want to just keep it kind of fluid and let's keep it kind of relaxed this morning. And I'm going to say first, next, then, after, conclude. First, what are we going to do, right? So we'll call this first. Okay, great. And then if I can use different colors, I'll try. Next. Then and I'm going to put after. These two are pretty similar, actually, hence why I kept the same color. And we'll do conclude. And of course, the difference between this stuff up here is, so desire, somebody wants something, right? So first, we're setting the scene, right? Next, we want to interject. I'm going to suggest actually interjecting a little bit of set the scene. Then next, we're going to inject a bit of humor. Humor is difficult. The best and easiest place to start with humor is self-deprecating. Being able to laugh at ourselves, finding a story that either includes us and a mistake we made, or we can associate ourselves with the mistake that was made. So, yeah, they did this thing and it was crazy, and I totally get it. The number of times I have made that type of mistake, I just constantly doing that, right? So self-deprecating humor is a way of really hacking into humor from the get-go, and in a way that's not trying to be funny. So I definitely think about that. Then Then what we want to do is highlight the issue. Right? And what we're doing here is looking at the unintended consequences. So this guy here connects over to this over here, right? Outcomes, consequences. So highlight the issue, because this is where this sort of little educational coaching moment's coming in. And then after that, which is, again, it's connected to that, the realization. So this, the realization of the issue. It's an issue, so it's got a mistake and what should have happened, right? So easy way to think about that is bad, good. Realized this, bad, and wanted to do this. So how on earth was I going to do that? And then concluding is wrapping it up, right? A way to really put a bow on it. Summarize, repeat, kind of like the, in marketing, messaging development, there's often like the 10 word, 25 word, 50 word, 100 word, right? So this is the like the 10 word or the 25 word. We're summarizing it at the end. Okay, so simple structure here. So okay, so we've got this problem, this thing's going on. In this case, it's this guy Mark, and he's sending these emails out that are causing this misunderstanding. That is, he doesn't realize it. He's a bit clueless to the fact that it's ticking people off, it's hurting him, and we're going to try and figure out a story to tell. So in this case, what our story to tell is not going to be an exact carbon copy, right? This time we're gonna still have it within the work environment. We're going to still have it be about communication. Think about a time when like a lighthearted blunder created a misunderstanding, right? And in this case, and this is a story, right? It was something I was saying. Let's do a nice bright color here. Let's do this. Is that bright enough? Okay. So this is the emotions misunderstanding. So we've found a story for misunderstanding, and we're going to call it the Thursday is the new Friday story. And what happened when I told this story was there was a misunderstanding, and it was misinformation in this case. That equaled frustration for the people around me, and for me, it caused anxiety, because I wasn't sure why people were reacting the way they were reacting. And even as I started to realize what it was, now I was worried that this had caused some damage. This is completely made up, by the way. So now we're going to see similarities. So not realizing. So Thursday's the new Friday. I said it. Clueless. I meant something else. What I meant was, hey, Thursday's the new Friday. Friday's a fun, Friday it's the TGIF like vibe. People do their weekly. This is kind of a bit of a TGIF, right? And it's about positivity because it's associated with the weekend and fun things of the weekend. I've always thought TGIF a bit weird if you love your job, but anyway. So it's about that positive energy. Thursday is the new Friday. It's like, come on, guys, let's have that kind of positive energy that's in the office on days that aren't just Friday, right? So that was the clueless aspect coming into that, and the outcome was management, senior management, were, let's say, frustrated. Remember that emotion we talked about up here, right? So this bit. They were frustrated because Matthew was going around the office telling people that Thursday was like Friday. And we very specifically said in our new hybrid work setup that Thursdays are one of the days that people need to be in the office. We're okay with them working from home on Fridays, but we basically said Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, that's when we want people to be in the office. And Matthew's going around saying that Thursday's like Friday, right? Misunderstanding, frustration from management, which itself causes political damage, right? These are different, right? There's no email involved. This was something that was said. This was referring back to those fun days when we were actually maybe going out on Thursday nights as well as Fridays before we had as many responsibilities with our work and family and all these types of things early on in our career, for example. I think back to my time at Intel in the UK, and there was a big student culture. It's kind of almost like folks coming from university going into Intel. There's a lot of student placements, and then I did the same and then started working at Intel. So there's all this energy around Thursdays, and that's where I was drawing it from. So it's different. It's okay that it's not exactly the same, and so I went through on the right there the sort of figuring the story out. So first of all, set the scene. So there was this time when I was in a team meeting and I said something I've been saying for a while, for a couple of weeks. I said, come on guys, Thursday's the new Friday. And what I kind of subconsciously picked up on last time, and I noticed this happening more this time, is there was kind of a bit of a, what is he talking about? Like a bit of kind of like eyebrow usage and eyeball usage. And I was like wondering what was going on. Self-deprecating humor. Turns out that everybody there thought I was saying, basically, you can work from home on Thursdays. And that was not at all what I was doing, right? I could have added more in the first section. I could have added more about like what I said about the culture, but I just said that. So I kind of covered that base. And then what I realized was, because we'd had such sensitivity around hybrid work and going back and forth on what the right mix was, which is very zeitgeist, by the way, right? Tapping into that that really ruffled management's feathers in the wrong way. And so what I realized was I had this huge negative reaction where I wanted to really be talking about the positive energy. And so at the end of the day, I thought I was trying to spend some positive cheer, Friday cheer into Thursdays, keep everybody motivated, positive contributions to the team. Completely misunderstood that my message wasn't landing properly, and ruffled all sorts of management feathers. And luckily it worked out for the best. And I just spent a little bit more time in the future thinking about what my stories might be that I might want to tell. And it was mindful of what had been, what was going on in the environment, and just checking my stories to that to see if I could spot any of those kind of issues. At the end of the day, I just spent a bit more time being thoughtful about it rather than just telling the story, right? And there we go. That's it. So we've told that in a team meeting, right? And Mark, in this case, is like, oh, Matthew was telling these stories and totally misinterpreting people. And then he's like, I didn't do that. I didn't do those types of stories. And I don't even really kind of share stories when I'm in team meetings. And he's sitting there quietly, not saying anything. And then he gets back to his desk and he's got to send an email. And as he goes to send that email, that story is still in his mind. And he thinks, I wonder how this is going to be interpreted. And then he just reads it again and he notices that actually, if you put somebody else's hat on or walked in somebody else's shoes, that it would be something that maybe didn't have the kind of outcomes that he was hoping for. there we go. Hopefully that was useful. Again, remember what we've been talking about here is, look, people tell us that we should tell stories, but how? Right? How should we tell stories? How should we go about doing that? There you got some practical examples. Now, if I was to take the story types as a part of that, and let's say that the challenge would be an obvious one, like if the challenge was our story type, that would be a really great story to tell, and to tell it in the way of the challenge of communication and interpretation and misinterpretation. It could be, if your story type was a pivot, that could also fit, because it's like changing behavior. Changing perceptions could be another potential fit. So if you had changing perceptions story type, that would be a story from your story bank that you eventually tap into. Growth mindset, actually not so much, right? Growth mindset is viewed in lots of different ways, but one of the key ways there is asking questions and whether it's externally or internally, to stimulate the ability to find new ways of doing things. And you could potentially see how that maybe was a bit of a fit with this story, but it really wasn't a big percentage of it. It was the realization there was more of a feedback, right? Noticing the eyes and the eyebrows and detecting there was something going on. Maybe somebody spoke to us about that, or maybe we asked somebody and they told us, you realize that what the VP of sales said about what you were saying about working from home on Thursdays? And you're like, what do you mean? I wasn't saying working home from home on Thursdays. So there might have been a little bit of growth mindset in there, but not so much. Innovation, not really. If your story type's in innovation, that's not going to be a story from your story bank that you're probably going to put into a story bank in the next 3 days, like I said, or when you've got a nice big story bank, it's not going to be when you pull from it. When might you pull that story if innovation is your story type? Maybe right now, the one story you should be telling is about changing perceptions. But in 12 months' time, when you come back and you take the assessment again, that your business situation now is one more of innovation. And then the innovation story types would be ones that you pull, or vice versa, right? So this isn't a story to be telling right now, but in a year's time, it turns out that our little Thursdays of the New Friday story make a lot of sense because of where we are and the types of stories we should be telling. So you've got your story type, and you don't need to worry about any of the structure. Just be on the hunt for stories, anecdotes, metaphors, jokes, anything that kind of resonates with your story type. And then when you're ready to actually go out and tell that story, think through what we just covered. And hopefully you took some screenshots or whatever. If you didn't, you can pull it back up real quick. Just give you a chance to do that. Or not. Okay. So again, this is so you take a screenshot of this as you're thinking through this, the stories you want to tell. You've got this. Next, click down. And here it is. Okay. Identify the emotions, seek out the similarities, focus on the outcomes, and be kind to yourself. Embrace the differences. And then as you go through telling the story, first this happened, next this happened, then this issue happened, and after that we realized the issue, acted differently, and then we concluded and we talked a bit more about that acting differently. So go ahead and screenshot this and use it as you're thinking about telling those stories, and let me know how you get on. And I didn't share the screen, so there we go. Share the screen so you can take the screenshot now. Yeah, let me know how it goes. Come along next week, ask some questions about how it went, and let's see if we can remove any of those roadblocks for you. And I'm expecting to hear some stories about customer interactions more than necessarily the team rallying stuff, which is totally legit. But maybe you're working on a marketing campaign and you're like, how does this work for a marketing campaign? And it can work for case studies, figuring out what customers to showcase. It can be fictional customer scenarios that you're creating for ads. It can be any number of things. So the world is your oyster, but remember, it all starts with a story time. So go ahead and take that. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much for turning up. I look forward to seeing you next time. And in the comments, feel free to ask comments in the meantime. You don't have to wait a whole week. Have a great one. Have a great weekend. Yes.